Well, the sun is bright, the moon is right, and everybody wants to go gardening. Today on Gardening with Mark, I'm going to share with you 3 tomato tricks that every gardener needs to know, starting right now. Hi everybody, I'm Mark Carey from Steepleview Farm. Welcome to this episode of Gardening with Mark. You know, everybody loves the taste of fresh tomatoes. That one time a year when you can get fine ripened tomatoes, there's just nothing better. And everybody wants to grow tomatoes. And everybody thinks they can grow tomatoes. But you know, there are some things that I've learned over all these decades of farming here at Steepleview Farm that I wanted to share with you, because as much as you would study tomatoes by looking at them at the stores or reading the names that kind of sell you on what you think the flavor is going to be, you know, I've made a study of what grows well and how to grow it well and how to produce a lot of tomatoes. Right now we've got over 2,000 tomato plants growing at Steepleview Farm and more to come. In fact, we have about 1,000 plants left to sell to our customers who come and pick up their tomatoes because they trust us to do the things that I'm going to share with you. Trick number 1, know exactly what kind of tomato you're going to be getting. You go to the big box stores, you look at something on the tag, it says it's going to be a delicious beefsteak type tomato, and you go, oh, that sounds wonderful. But what do you know about that tomato? Really and truly, very few people put the time in to study all the different kinds of tomatoes that are out there and experiment with the ones that'll grow well. If you go to a farmer's market, take a look at the tomatoes you see. We used to set up at farmers markets, and I would see guys with tomatoes. They look beautiful on the table. They look gorgeous. And then when they were done, whatever they didn't sell, they dumped them into a box and dragged them down the highway and tried to sell them a couple days later. You know what that tells me about the kind of tomatoes they're raising? They're tough. They have to have tough skins and tough flesh so they don't bruise, they don't crack, and they don't leak. Trick number 1 is knowing what kind of tomatoes you're buying. Basically, there are 2 categories of tomatoes, determinate and indeterminate. So what's the difference? Well, this is an indeterminate tomato. It will grow into a vine. This vine on this tomato plant can be 30 or 40 feet long under the right conditions. That means you're going to have to do a lot more to take care of this plant. This plant, on the other hand, is a determinate plant. It grows to a predetermined size, usually like a bush, great for containers or small gardens or small spaces, and it produces almost all of its tomatoes at the same time. They all ripen at about the same time on the entire plant. On the indeterminate plant, it continues to produce tomatoes all throughout the growing season. Not all at once, but little by little, ripening from the bottom up if they get enough light and they get enough air and they get the right nutrients. So trick number 1, know what kind of tomato you're buying, and the first 2 categories of tomatoes you need to become familiar with are indeterminate and determinate tomatoes. Tomato trick number 2. When you bring your tomato plant home, typically it's going to be in some sort of a container like this, a little pot. Maybe it's going to be in a biodegradable pot, a peat pot. Sometimes you might go someplace and buy small plants. They come in 4 or 5 cell trays. But when you take your tomato plant home, you need to know how to plant it. Like any plant, the vast majority of the growth in that plant is due to the roots. The more you can do to give your plant healthy roots, the healthier the plant will be. Trick number 2. When you bring your tomato plant home, don't just take the pot off, bunch up the roots, stick it in a hole and plant it up to here. Strip all the leaves off this tomato plant right up to here. As far up as you can get, strip all the leaves off and bury every bit of that stem and the root ball in the ground. This stem will become roots. This will give your plant a much bigger root system to start with. If you can't dig a hole deep enough to bury it up to here, dig a trench and lay it sideways and just give it a slight bend so that the top is sticking out of the ground. It'll straighten up on its own. Tomato trick number 3. When you bring your tomato plants home and you've gotten them peeled off to the point where you've got plenty of stem and it's buried in the ground and you know what kind of tomato plant you're going to have, now you need to prepare yourself for taking care of the plant and supporting it. Going back to trick number 1, since you know whether you have a determinate or indeterminate plant, you will now know that you have different methods by which you must support the plant. For example, if you have a determinate plant, which is going to be a bush, You can support it in one of those wire cages. If you have it in a container, you could put some stakes around the perimeter and some strings around the stakes to kind of hold it together. If you have 2 or 3 of them in a row, you can put stakes at the end of the row and run strings alongside of them to kind of help keep the leaves and the fruit up off of the ground. But don't forget, if you raise a healthy tomato plant, it's going to produce 20 or 25 pounds of tomatoes. That's a lot of weight hanging on that plant that could potentially break the plant down to the ground, kill it, and there goes your tomato crop for the season. If you're raising an indeterminate tomato, then you need to support what is a vine. There are a number of ways of doing that, and we here at Steepleview Farm have experimented with a number of ways of trellising tomatoes. We have actually invented a trellising system, which I'm going to show you in my next video. So one thing you need to do now is be sure to subscribe to my channel. There's a little button down in the corner, and there's another one right below the video. Hit the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel, so as we update our content, as your tomatoes grow, as there's more you need to know in order to take care of them and support them, you can be informed through what we're going to share with you. After 35 years of gardening at Steepleview Farm, we're going to share all the tricks and tips that we've learned with you as the season progresses. And don't forget to hit the little bell. That way you'll be notified when new content is posted, which is going to be every Friday. In addition to the 3 tomato tricks that every gardener needs to know, here's a 4th one. As your indeterminate tomato plant begins to produce fruit, pinch off the leaves below the ripening fruit cluster. In fact, on all of your tomato plants, when you put them in the ground, you should begin to pinch off the leaves that might come in contact with the ground or might be splashed with dirt when it rains or you water the plants. You want to keep your tomato plants clean, just a stalk up about 14 inches off of the ground. But as you begin to produce tomatoes on your indeterminate plant and as they move their way up the vine, you need to pinch off the leaves below the ripening fruit cluster. Provide no nutrients to the tomatoes above them, so you can just pinch them off, allowing more air and more sunlight into your plant to help ripen your fruit. So once again, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining us on our channel. Hope you enjoyed these 3 tomato tricks that every gardener needs to know. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, hit the bell so you get notification, and by all means, you know that Steepleview Farm is our little piece of heaven, and we hope to see you here.